A drainage ditch. That is all it was supposed to be. In Sichuan province, China, 2 workers digging a simple trench hit something that should not have existed. Metal, buried in the mud, over a meter wide, shaped like a face. Bronze with ears flared sideways like wings and eyes mounted on stalks, jutting 10 centimeters beyond the sockets, staring up out of the ground with an expression matching nothing in any book, any museum, any record of ancient China. The workers stopped digging. What came out of that hole over the following weeks forced scholars to admit something unsettling. That an entire advanced civilization had existed for centuries, cast bronze on a level with Egypt and Greece, and vanished so completely that not one Chinese historical text, not a single character in 3,000 years of continuous written record, ever mentioned it happened. That was only the beginning. Bronze trees over 4 meters tall grew out of the same pits, gold fruit still clinging to their branches. A standing bronze figure rose nearly 3 meters, the tallest bronze statue ever pulled from the ancient world. Every piece had been broken, burned and buried on purpose roughly 3,000 years ago, as though someone wanted the whole civilization erased. And this was not an isolated case. Around the world, in deserts, jungles, coral reefs, and volcanic ash, entire civilizations have surfaced that contradict everything. Historians thought they understood about human capability, timelines, and silence. A forest Europeans insisted for 5 centuries was empty turned out, under a laser scan in 2022, to be hiding cities, not villages, laced with roads and farmland built for a population that may have run into the millions. In southern Turkey, the hilltop farmers plowed around for generations concealed a temple 12,000 years old, built before agriculture, before pottery, before metal, before writing, by hunter-gatherers who were not supposed to be capable of organized construction. The textbooks said it could not happen. The stones do not care what the textbook said. This is the countdown of hidden civilizations that even historians struggle to accept. And the final one on this list did not just add a chapter to human history. It rewrote the first one. And the argument over what it means still has not been settled. Stay to the end. Tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from right now. Number 10 takes us to a coral reef in the Pacific, on the island of Pohnpei in the Federated States of Micronesia. 92 artificial islands sit stacked on that reef, built from columns of black volcanic basalt arranged like a giant's log cabin, walls rising as high as 8 meters. Some columns weigh 50 tons, some are longer than a school bus. There is no basalt quarry anywhere near that reef. The nearest source sits on the main island, across open ocean. Somebody, using pre-industrial tools, moved tens of thousands of multi-ton stone columns across the sea and stacked them into a functioning city on a reef 3,000 kilometers from the nearest continent. This place is Nan Madol, ceremonial and political capital of the Saudolur dynasty, built roughly between 1,200 and 1,500 years after the birth of Christ. Researchers working with the Smithsonian have mapped the site at roughly 1.5 square kilometers of reef and lagoon, with canals wide enough for canoes, earning it the nickname Venice of the Pacific. A local historic preservation researcher has estimated the total basalt used at roughly 750,000 tons. In the 1990s, a research team tried moving a single basalt column using traditional rollers, sledges, and dozens of laborers. It took far longer than the entire site's construction timeline would allow if the same method scaled to every column. The math does not work using known ancient technology. The people of Pohnpei have their own answer, documented by local historic preservation authorities. They say the stones flew, commanded through the air from the quarry to the reef by the Saudolur rulers. Archaeologists call that impossible, but they cannot explain the conventional alternative either. The stones exist, the quarry exists. The ocean sits between them, and nobody has closed that gap. Number 9 drops us into the Fezzan region of southwestern Libya, deep inside the Sahara. Summer temperatures climb past 50 degrees Celsius, rainfall sits near zero, and yet hundreds of thousands of people lived there for roughly 1,000 years. This was the Garamantes, who controlled the region from around 500 years before Christ until roughly 700 years after. 2 decades of fieldwork led by a University of Leicester researcher have proven the Garamantes were not scattered nomads, but built fortified towns and monumental tombs, supporting a population some estimates place in the hundreds of thousands, in a landscape with no river, lake, or rain. The answer lies underground. Surveys have identified more than 600 underground tunnels called fogaras, stretching for hundreds of kilometers beneath the desert. These tapped a fossil aquifer, ancient water trapped deep in the rock from a wetter climate thousands of years earlier. Gravity alone pulled that water to the surface, irrigating farmland without a single pump. Rome knew the civilization existed. The historian Tacitus recorded that Roman forces tried to subdue the Garamantes and failed because raiders would strike the coast and vanish back into the desert where no legion could sustain a supply line long enough to follow. Their empire was protected by the Sahara itself, but that same desert eventually destroyed them from the inside. The fossil water sustaining them was never being replenished, a finite resource drawn down over roughly a millennium. When it ran out, the civilization ran out with it. Rome could not defeat the Garamantes, and the desert alone could not either. It was the water table, quietly emptying beneath their feet, that finally did. Number 8 belongs to the tomb robbers who found it, not the archaeologists. In 1972, in Colombia's Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta Mountains, looters hacking through jungle found stone steps rising out of the undergrowth. They climbed over 1,000 of them until the jungle opened onto a lost city, 169 stone terraces carved into the mountainside at 900 meters elevation, complete with plazas and retaining walls across 13 hectares, hidden under canopy so dense no aerial survey had ever detected it. The looters sold gold figurines on the black market for years before officials noticed unusually large amounts of ancient gold appearing for sale in 1976 and traced it back to the mountains. The city is Ciudad Perdida, built around the year 800 by the Tairona civilization, roughly 650 years before Machu Picchu existed. Research places its population between 2,000 and 8,000 people, the hub for a network of more than 200 settlements across the mountains. The terraces are not simply cleared land. They are constructed platforms with built-in drainage systems designed to prevent erosion on steep slopes, engineering that has kept them intact for over 1,000 years in a region receiving more than 2,000 millimeters of rain annually. Reaching the site still requires a 4 to 6 day hike with no road and no helicopter landing site, and only a fraction of the visitors who flock to Machu Picchu ever make the trip. The Kogi and Wiwa peoples, descendants of the Tairona, still live in these mountains as guardians of the site, and they insist they did not lose this city. They chose to let the forest cover it. Number 7 returns us to China, to a hilltop in Shaanxi province, where in 2011 archaeologists surveying the landscape found a stone wall that ran on for kilometers. Behind it stood a fortified city, and at its center, rising roughly 70 meters above the plain, stood a stepped pyramid built from stone. This is Shimao, covering roughly 4 square kilometers, and dating to somewhere between 2,300 and 1,800 years before Christ, placing it alongside the Egyptian Old Kingdom and the earliest cities of Mesopotamia. This pyramid was not a tomb. Excavations found palatial buildings, craft production areas, and water infrastructure built into its upper terraces, a center of power whose footprint at the base is larger than the Great Pyramid of Giza, even though it stands roughly half as tall. The eastern gate holds something darker. Archaeologists recovered roughly 70 human skulls from pits beneath and within the walls, predominantly young women, and isotopic testing of their teeth showed they had grown up in a different region entirely, suggesting they were captives brought there to be killed as part of the construction ritual. Jade eye-shaped ornaments were embedded, facing outward into the pyramid's stone face, so the structure appeared to be watching the plain through dozens of carved eyes. The earliest Chinese dynastic records begin roughly 500 years after Shimao was abandoned. By the time anyone in China was writing history down, this city had already vanished from memory. A pyramid larger at its base than Giza, built on the skulls of murdered captives, and in 4,000 years of the most documented civilization on Earth, nobody wrote a single word about it. Number 6 moves to Santorini in the Aegean, where around 1,600 years before Christ, the volcano beneath the island erupted with a force estimated at roughly 4 times Krakatoa, sending an eruption column some 36 kilometers into the atmosphere. The blast tore the center out of the island, creating today's caldera, and sent a tsunami crashing into coastlines across the eastern Mediterranean. Buried beneath up to 40 meters of ash on the island's southern tip was a city. Excavations begun in 1967 uncovered a Minoan settlement preserved the way Pompeii was, except buried 1,500 years earlier, with buildings standing 2 and 3 stories tall, intact streets, and indoor toilets connected to underground sewage, sanitation Europe would not see again for over 1,000 years. The wall paintings stop people cold, preserved in colors so vivid they look freshly applied, showing swallows in flight, children boxing in padded gloves, fishermen carrying strings of fish, and ships sailing into harbor beside leaping dolphins. But one detail from decades of excavation has never been explained. Not one human body has ever been found at the site, 0 skeletons across every excavation season. In Pompeii, thousands died with no warning. Here, everyone made it out. Residents dismantled parts of their own homes before the eruption, removing doors and taking valuables with them. They knew it was coming. They packed, they took their dead, they took their doors, and sailed away in ships that resemble the ones painted on their own walls. Where that fleet went is a question 3,600 years of history has never answered. Number 5 takes us to Sindh province in Pakistan. Everyone learns about the pharaohs and the kings of Mesopotamia in school. Ask who ruled the Indus Valley civilization, and most historians cannot answer. The city is Mohenjo-Daro, roughly 4,500 years old. A British archaeologist digging beneath Buddhist ruins in the 1920s broke through into a planned city with a full grid layout, standardized brick sizes, and drainage running beneath every street. It was not alone. Over following decades, archaeologists identified more than 1,000 settlements belonging to the same civilization, spread across an area larger than ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia combined. Mohenjo-Daro itself housed roughly 40,000 people. Excavators uncovered a massive public bath, waterproofed with bitumen still studied for its effectiveness today. Private homes with individual wells and indoor bathrooms connected to covered sewage, a standard the region would not see again until the modern era. Bricks recovered from sites separated by more than 1,000 kilometers maintained a consistent ratio for centuries, with no obvious central authority enforcing it. And that is what makes Mohenjo-Daro genuinely bizarre. Decades of excavation across hundreds of Indus Valley sites have found no palace, no temple, no throne room, no statue of a ruler, no weapons cache, and no mass graves. A civilization of millions, more urban than Mesopotamia, standardized across a vast territory with no evidence of who was in charge. A researcher who has spent more than 4 decades studying the Indus Valley has called this one of the great unsolved puzzles in archaeology. Number 4 takes us to the Amazon rainforest, across sites in modern Brazil, Bolivia, and Ecuador, where for 5 centuries the scholarly world was simply wrong. The rainforest was long treated as too dense and poor in soil to support large-scale settlement. When a Spanish conquistador sailed down the Amazon in the 1540s and reported vast cities along the riverbanks, historians dismissed it as fantasy for 400 years. In 2022, a laser survey proved him right, revealing urban settlements hidden beneath the canopy in Bolivia's Llanos de Mojos region, including pyramidal platform mounds rising as high as 22 meters, connected by causeways stretching for kilometers, with canals and reservoirs for water management. These settlements were occupied for roughly 1,900 years, some housing thousands of people, their causeways elevated above the seasonal floodline so they stayed usable when the land turned to shallow lake for months at a time. In 2024, a separate laser survey revealed an even older network in Ecuador's Upano Valley, dating back more than 2,000 years, with over 6,000 earthen structures spread across 300 square kilometers and population estimates reaching into the tens of thousands. The Amazon was never empty. It was managed and shaped by human hands for thousands of years. And the forest that European colonists mistook for untouched wilderness was an engineered landscape whose caretakers had already been killed by disease before any European laid eyes on it. Smallpox and measles traveled ahead of the colonists along established trade routes, wiping out populations before contact was ever recorded. The forest grew back over the empty cities, and the Europeans, who arrived afterward, looked at the trees and concluded that nobody had ever been there. Number 3 sends us back to Sichuan, to a site called Sanxingdui, near the city of Guanghan. In 1986, 2 workers at a brick factory construction site uncovered 2 pits filled with objects matching nothing else in 3,000 years of Chinese archaeology. Bronze masks with eyes protruding on cylindrical stalks, gold-covered staffs, jade blades, and a bronze tree over 4 meters tall with branches holding birds, flowers, and gold leaf fruit. The pits date to roughly 1,200 to 1,000 years before Christ, within the late Shang dynasty period, yet nothing recovered resembles Shang culture at all, with no parallel anywhere else in East Asian archaeology. In 2020 and 2021, 6 more pits were excavated, yielding over 13,000 additional artifacts, including a gold mask that had covered a bronze head, an elaborate bronze altar, and fragments of silk older than any other found in southwestern China. The objects had been deliberately burned and broken before burial. Bronze vessels smashed and gold folded, placed alongside more than 100 elephant tusks, and burned before being covered with earth. The mystery is the silence surrounding them. Chinese records from the Shang and Zhou dynasties document kingdoms, wars, and alliances across the entire cultural sphere in exhaustive detail. Not one surviving text mentions a bronze-producing civilization anywhere in the Sichuan Basin. Producing bronze at this scale required organized mining, dedicated smelting infrastructure, and specialized artisans supported by real agricultural surplus. Metallurgical analysis shows the alloy compositions here differ from the Shang heartland, pointing to independent development rather than borrowing. A civilization that cast bronze as skillfully as anyone alive at the time, that destroyed its own masterpieces on purpose and buried them beside 100 elephant tusks, existed for centuries inside the most documented cultural sphere on Earth. And the people who wrote down everything never wrote down a single word about it. Number 2 takes us to El Salvador's Zapotitan Valley, where, in June of 1976, a bulldozer clearing land for a government grain silo struck plastered clay walls buried beneath the topsoil. The operator stopped the machine and called for help, and the archaeologist who answered would spend decades of his career at the site. What he found was a Maya village buried under 14 layers of volcanic ash, now known as Joya de Karen, and often called the Pompeii of the Americas, though that comparison undersells it. Pompeii preserved a wealthy Roman city built for elites. Siren preserved an ordinary farming village, captured in the exact moment its world ended on an afternoon around the year 600. Analysis over 4 decades of excavation determined the residents had roughly 1 hour of warning before the ash fell. They ran, leaving almost everything behind. Archaeologists recovered painted bowls still holding food, fingerprints preserved in clay where jars were set down mid-use, sleeping mats still laid out, and a ceremonial building where a religious offering still sat untouched on its altar. They found a sauna and storerooms filled with beans, chilies, cotton, and cacao seeds sorted into separate containers. The most remarkable preservation is in the farm fields themselves, where ash fossilized rows of maize roughly 2 months into the growing season, preserving the exact ridge pattern the farmers had planted them in, a technique long assumed to have arrived with Spanish colonization over 1,000 years later. The corn buried at Siren proved Maya farmers were already using it by the year 600, forcing a rewrite of textbooks on pre-Columbian agriculture. Number one is the discovery that did not just add to human history, it forced historians to rewrite the first page of it. In 1994, a shepherd walking a hilltop near Sanxingdui in southeastern Turkey noticed a strangely shaped stone protruding from the dirt, with a flat surface and a carved edge unlike the limestone around it. Excavations revealed circular enclosures built from massive T-shaped limestone pillars, some weighing over 15 tons, some nearly 6 meters tall, carved with reliefs of foxes, boars, snakes, vultures, scorpions, and lions in a style with no known precedent anywhere. Radiocarbon dating placed the earliest construction at approximately 9,500 years before Christ, roughly 12,000 years ago. That date is the entire problem. 12,000 years ago, human beings were hunter-gatherers with no agriculture, no domesticated animals, no permanent settlements, and none of the organized labor or food surplus required to quarry, transport, and raise 15-ton pillars. The accepted model of human development ran one direction for generations: farming first, then settlement, then social complexity, then organized labor, and only at the very end, religion and monumental temples. This site inverts the entire sequence. Excavation found no evidence of permanent habitation, no houses, no storage facilities, no farming tools. The people who built it were hunter-gatherers who traveled to this hilltop specifically to build, then left again. The desire to build a sacred space may have come before agriculture, before settlement, before everything. Historians assumed had to come first. Religion did not emerge out of civilization. Civilization may have emerged out of religion. Some researchers believe the site may represent a transitional settlement rather than a purely ceremonial one, pointing to early grain processing found at nearby contemporary sites, as evidence agriculture may have been developing at roughly the same time. But the pillars remain unexplained under any model. Experimental research has calculated that quarrying and transporting a single 15-ton pillar from the limestone source roughly 100 meters away would require a coordinated workforce of at least 500 people. And feeding 500 hunter-gatherers for the duration of a construction project demands food management previously believed to exist only within agricultural societies. There is a detail most retellings leave out. This site was not simply abandoned. It was buried deliberately, layer by layer, filled with rubble, earth, animal bones, and stone tools. The pillars were covered. The carved animals were sealed beneath tons of fill by hand, an effort roughly equal to the original construction, just to hide what had been built. For roughly 10,000 years afterward, that hilltop stayed buried while shepherds walked over it daily, with no idea the oldest monumental architecture on earth sat directly beneath their feet. A shepherd noticed one unusual stone, and archaeologists spent the rest of their careers uncovering what it was hiding. What came out of that hillside forced a rewrite of the opening chapter of the human story. We were taught that survival comes first, then farming, then villages, then gods. This site suggests the order may have run the opposite way, that the temples came first, and everything that followed for the next 12,000 years, farming, villages, cities, kingdoms, and empires, may have started because a group of hunter-gatherers looked at a hilltop and decided it needed something sacred built on top of it. 10 civilizations, each buried by ash, jungle, sand, ocean, or by nothing more than the assumption they could never have existed. 92 artificial islands stacked from 50-ton basalt columns on a coral reef, built by a kingdom whose descendants insist the stones flew there. An empire that survived the Sahara for 1,000 years by drinking from water tens of thousands of years old until it ran dry. A city in the Colombian jungle 650 years older than Machu Picchu, discovered by looters and now protected by descendants of those who built it. A stone pyramid in China, larger at its base than Giza, built over the skulls of murdered captives, that the most documented civilization on Earth forgot to mention for 3,000 years. A city buried under volcanic ash, where every resident escaped and nobody knows where they went. A city of 40,000 with indoor plumbing and no king, no temple, and no army anyone has found. Cities across the Amazon the forest reclaimed only after disease wiped out the people who shaped that landscape for millennia. A bronze civilization that produced masks unlike anything else on the planet, then deliberately destroyed and buried its own greatest works. A Maya farming village preserved down to the fingerprints in the clay. And a temple on a Turkish hilltop, built 12,000 years ago by people never supposed to be capable of building anything at all, then buried on purpose by the very hands that built it. Every one of these civilizations was invisible until the moment it wasn't, and every time one has surfaced, it has broken something historians thought they understood for certain. The textbooks were never wrong exactly. They were incomplete. And every time somebody notices a strange stone in the dirt, points a laser scanner through a forest canopy, or hits something unexpected with a bulldozer, driven for an entirely different reason, those incomplete pages get a little larger. The ground beneath us is still full of things nobody has found. The ocean floor is still full of places nobody has properly looked. And somewhere out there right now, the next civilization capable of rewriting what we think we know about ourselves is probably sitting under a hill that people walk across every single day without stopping. Which one of these civilizations surprised you the most? Tell us in the comments, and if you made it all the way to the end of this list, you already know exactly the kind of channel this is. Subscribe, turn on notifications, and we will see you in